there are two people in the market, one is saying I'm able to protect your data a certain way, the other is not, then you know where people are going to go.
What are three technical decisions that could have a big impact on DPDP?
But if you are getting into model training, I will always caution people about the fact that I said that models will never forget anything.
For somebody that's listening right now, and they're new to this whole thing, and they want to do something over the next 30 days, where do you think they should start?
Don't wait. My biggest
Okay.
advice.
Welcome to the Neural Talks, your gateway to the forefront of AI innovation. I'm your host, Ranjit Malarkot, and together we'll explore the AI revolution with the brightest minds pushing boundaries and shaping the future. Through candid conversations, they share hard-won insights as we unlock the transformative power of AI. Get informed, get inspired. This is the future, and you're in the front row. You touched on data minimization. Most of us are all data maximization people, especially AI and machine learning engineers, right? I do understand it's going to be a complex change for us to actually adapt to. But let me go down to a practical, scenario, right? So, for example, there's an AI or there's an AI model that's actually part of a recruitment platform, and people are actually dumping their resumes on it. So now, what should they collect? I mean, what do they actually need? What should they collect, and what should they typically not collect?
So let's look at it, right? So if I am a recruiting platform and I'm looking for a job, they should know my name,
Okay.
my work history, maybe where I live, because if that's important. But I think some other things they also collect today in a lot of places is my gender. They don't really need to collect that in the system. They don't
Okay.
need to collect birth date either. Nobody needs to know the age of someone, right? There's also, in some cases, I know nowadays LinkedIn is something that everyone, puts in because that's our professional, profile. But then there are a lot of places where people are even asking for social handles of, your Instagram or Facebook or, X or whatever. Those things shouldn't be collected. There's also another part of what is it being collected for? How long is it going to be there? Because if I found a job through you within a week, I don't want you keeping my data beyond that. I just gave you this data so I could get my next job. That doesn't mean you can keep it in your database, which most recruiting platforms do today because we did not enforce the consent initially. Because later on, I could
Correct.
come back and say, hey, you know what? Delete all my data. What are you going to do? It's in the model. You're not going to be able to delete it because it's already in there. So I think there's a lot of that kind of stuff that we should not be collecting when you look at a recruiting thing.
And so, if a user, most of the users today, especially all the entry level folks, Amrita, today in
Yeah.
India, they dump a resume which has their passport number, Aadhaar, ID, their home address. It has everything as part of it, right? Recruitment platform that's actually DPDP compliant should basically it can actually accept this, and then sort of just pick up the pieces that it wants from it, and then sort of leave that for a time, or should it just reject this altogether?
They shouldn't reject. So now we have tech, right? And we do this in Skyflow as well. You have the ability before anything goes into a model, there are input and output controls that, and we are talking about a conversational or I call it a inference or a runtime interface, right? Something going in, something coming out. When something's going into a model or your chatbot, you want to scan it. So what we could do is you upload your resume, I scan the file, and I detect the elements or the entities that I don't want to send to this model, and
Got
I
it.
remove them. And even for the entities that I am sending, I could, in a way, anonymize it. So one of the
Got it.
things we do in Skyflow is I will anonymize Amruta Moktali to name underscore ABCD when it goes into the model. Every time you see Amruta Moktali, you will get name underscore ABCD. So you can go and do your matches and things like that. And that keeps your model safe from any leakage of sensitive data. And that'll also help from a consent standpoint because, hey, you don't have my information. You have anonymized information.
Got it. So basically, the intent is to not reject, but to sort of filter and then choose what is compliant and then accept only those bits.
Exactly.
Superb. This is very, very clear. Thank you for that, Amrita. So, coming back to the three pillars that you actually just spoke about earlier, right?
Yeah.
Um, Consent. Um, Today, I think one of the biggest things that might actually affect AI companies, especially building models, is withdrawal of consent. I'm actually building an AI model, and
Mhm.
it's already gone through the data has already gone through my pipeline. I've already built this model, and then the user withdraws consent. Right, so it's pretty complex to actually just withdraw that piece out. So how do you think architects should actually think about this, and how should they handle this withdrawal of consent, not only from AI models but from other kinds of data as well?
So I think you know y- models are very tricky, and which is why I tell people don't give personal data to a model, because
Okay.
withdrawal of consent from a model is very tricky. You right now there are a couple of ways folks are saying, okay, you know what, I'm going to create system prompts or things where a model will never remember information, but there is enough of prompt injection jailbreaking that can actually extract any information out of a model. So I would say that when you're dealing with actual model, you shouldn't try to even give it that sensitive information. Keep that sensitive information in a context, or make sure it is not stored in memory. You're not giving it when you're training or fine tuning the model, right? Because sometimes you can flush the memory. Now, of course, that gets into the long lived memory problem, but I'll table that for now. The other thing folks can do is deploy a good RAG based architecture, because then all your data is not like literally sitting in the model. You have it outside, and then similar to how you're applying deletion rules in your structured databases, you could potentially do that in your vector db that you're putting a RAG based model on. So you'll have to go in. It's not easy, but at least there is a way to go and delete embeddings based on a particular data. It's expensive, but those are some of the ways that you can go ahead and delete it. But most of the time, we tell folks is try not to take it also. Like even if you go to any of these chatbots today, go and ask, do a prompt to any your favorite, chatbot or chat GPT, Gemini, anything, and say, what data should I not send you or give you? And it'll literally say, don't give me any personal information or financial information or anything like that.
It's too late.
So
We've all given all that in 2022 and 23.
you've
So we've
already
given it
given it,
everything,
right?
including our Aadhaar card, I'm sure. So
Yes.
thanks for sharing that. That's really very helpful. So which brings me to the next point, right? Which privacy, by design, right? Um, so for an AI, team that's starting next week on a new project, what do
Mhm.
you think that they should think about for privacy by design?
If you're starting AI project from scratch, I think there's, of course, you're going to start thinking about what are the different pieces I'm going to use, right? Now we have models, we have MCP servers, you have agents, you have RAG based, you have vector DBs, all of these things. Now, the piece you want to think about is how is the data flowing through this architecture and through all the AI actors in this architecture, right? Draw that out as a team, because you will have training, fine tuning if you're doing that. How is the data pipeline for that being set up? What are the guardrails you're putting together? What is the eval that you're going to do on your model and your agent before you're deploying it outside? Because there is a eval you will do based on privacy and security. There is one eval you'll also do based on, hey, I have built this for this purpose. Is it doing the right job? So you'll have those things, and make sure you have a plan for what I'm going to test pre-production. Most of the time it is, this privacy security pieces we are talking about, as well as the logging and traceability that you need. And then once in production, again, what is the data flow going to be like? What's going to go in, what's going to go out? So I couldn't emphasize more in terms of just, people visualizing the end-to-end data flow where they are doing different checkpoints, guardrails, evals, and how they are tracking to it would be kind of the first few pieces you want to think about as you're starting.
Super. So, on that same note, for companies, that are working on privacy by design, what are the top mistakes you see them making?
I think the biggest mistake is what I've talked about a lot around like privacy is like an afterthought because
Afterthought. Okay.
because a lot of times, we've known of privacy being something the legal team cares about. You
Correct.
know, it's
Correct.
legal stuff, it's a checkbox, but we are talking about now data privacy, which is not a legal thing. Bolting it on is very difficult. I think the other thing is, so when you use data, there are two different ways to use data. We use data in our transactional and operational workflows. And then we are now pumping that data into models for training and fine tuning. We want to be a little careful as this data is going into, let's say, a repo from which your team is going to pick it up for fine tuning training. That data is either aggregated, anonymized, or you don't have anything sensitive sitting in that data to separate these datas out by usage. And when you're collecting data, right, this goes back to the consent stuff and everything that we were talking about. Make sure you know what you're collecting the right amount of stuff, and you have the consent for it, and you have the ability to explain why you're collecting it.
Right? I mean, most of us are actually used to, let's also collect this, let's also collect that. It's going to be useful someday. And it's not really very well, articulated as to why we need something. But I think now it's going to force people to think about why they're collecting something and where they're going to use it. And then they have to explain it. So explainability, as you said, is probably something that, people have to now think of.
Yes.
Um, so for somebody that's listening right now, and they're new to this whole thing,
Hmm.
and they want to do something over the next 30 days. Where do you
Okay.
think they should start, and how do you think they should direct this journey?
I think the biggest place to start would be assess your gaps,
Okay.
because you may have put some things in place, but maybe there are some holes here and there. I think that's probably the first thing you want to go do is like, where's my data? What have I done for this? What have I not done? I can't emphasize more around data flows. A lot of times, folks don't know where their data is going. And this is most common in analytical workflows, because what happens is we dump a bunch of data in a data warehouse or lake house, and then we don't know how it's being used downstream.
Correct.
So, and, someone's taken a spreadsheet somewhere which has a bunch of sensitive data and you don't know. So, if you're doing something now in the next, like, let's say 30 days, figure out, like, map out your data mat. So, figure out the gaps that you have, see what you can block, and see where you can add more protections and things like that. And then create just a roadmap, because everything's not possible immediately. And then you have to figure out the high risk points. So I always talk about, like, figure out which places you think you have the most leakage of data, or the most amount of data just going away and you don't know what's happening. So being able to make sure, and the first thing a lot of people do is they start logging and tracing. Like, let me start logging where this data is going and things like that. And if you don't have it yet, start investing in some sort of a consent framework.
I think it's fairly lays out, first is data inventory and then map the flows, map the gaps across these flows, and then start thinking about, the three pillars that we spoke about: privacy, sorry, consent, data minimization, and then privacy by design, and then see where all the gaps are coming out.
Yeah.
Very clear. So if I have to talk about technical architecture a bit, Amrita, what are three technical decisions that could have a big impact on DPDP?
I think the technical decisions would be, how are you protecting the data, would be one
Okay.
of those from a technical aspect. Because a lot of times we do encryption at rest and in motion, but when it's in use, it's everywhere. So I think
Got it.
one of the key pieces from a technology standpoint is, how are you protecting the data when it is in use, is going to be one of the key pieces. Then the second technical piece is going to be your consent framework. And I say framework and not like systems, because as you collect consent, it has to sit somewhere, it has to be enforced. So you need the technology pieces to be able to enforce the consent as data is being shared and used everywhere. So you'll need that. The third technology piece you'll need is monitoring, tracing, logging, all of those pieces. because you have to be able to report on what is happening. So if I have to choose kind of three pieces, I would say these kind of would be the three big pieces.
We don't normally think about, especially, the first two pieces, maybe observability and logging, people do think about, but the first two pieces do not intuitively come into most of us as builders. So I'm really glad that we actually called that out. We spoke about data localization, data residency, right?
Yeah.
Now, this is a potential area where costs can go up, for a small startup or for an enterprise, because if they were using cheap global storage, so suddenly they can't do this. How should they think about this trade-off? I mean, between compliance and flexibility, how do you think they should actually think about this?
Think so this is a common problem that we deal with when we talk to customers, right? Because if you're a
Okay.
global company, you are going to have to deal with global data, and data is going to have to reside in different places based on regulations. Now, it depends architecturally if this data is sitting in third-party SaaS platforms, is it in your own database, right? That's how you want to think about it. Again, I go back to the part of the data you really need to localize and protect is 1% of the data. So
Correct.
let's say you are working on telemetry of someone's, device. Just the person's device identity and the person's information needs to be localized in a place. Everything else can still come in. So even think of it as if you have a customer ID, right? If that customer ID can be linked with all the non-essential data that you need to actually process, you're fine. Keep the customer's data, as we call it, the user table, localized, and everything else can actually work across the board. So that is one way to make sure that you're not exponentially increasing your cost by just replicating your whole infrastructure in every locale that you can see. And this was one of the key pieces actually we did at Skyflow, because what started happening is, so a lot of the SaaS platforms, you have to have different orgs or instances in every global region with governance policies, and it becomes very expensive for mid-sized
Absolutely.
companies. So then what we started doing is we said, okay, no, we'll create a vault in France, we'll create a vault in India, we'll create a vault in the US. So the personal data can stay there. And then the tokenized data shows up in the UI. And then only the right person with the governance policies that you will have will get access to it. So there are these different ways to reduce the costs where you can basically not show the data, not bring the data cross border to reduce the costs around like your data residency.
Thanks, Amrita. That really helps. I mean, it simplifies architectural choices and also helps, builders sort of see how to choose architectures that support flexibility at the same time keeping costs low. So
Mhm.
thanks for that. If I'm a startup and I'm building on AI or with AI for the first time, and I want to build with this, is there a minimum viable architecture or a minimum viable set of components that I should invest in today?
I think yes, and it depends on what you're doing. So a lot of times now there are several different platforms available, right? So, where you can kind of not even, so for example, there is Bedrock from AWS or others where, all your Hugging Face is also very common. There's another company called Together AI. There's a bunch of different ones who allow you to play around with the model, build agents. So I would say, as a startup, first you're going to try it out, generate some synthetic data, try things out, see what you're going to build, and then start taking small building blocks. So it's cost prohibitive to kind of host your own model for a lot of startups. So you are going to use a public model. Now, everyone keeps thinking that you need a large language model. I encourage folks to think, can a small language model work for you? Because it's as good. There are open source models like Olama now with Granite 4 and stuff that are like pretty powerful. And then the one thing you can think about as you're plugging these things together, whether you're using agents or whatever, is make it work with synthetic data first. So you're not worried about when you're experimenting, you don't have customers, just kind of try things out. And then as you start getting a customer or two in, the easiest thing to put is guardrails. and there are enough open source tools to put guardrails in there. Start with that. And you'll start with blocking the data, which is okay. You'll just say, hey, this contains some sensitive, I'm not even going to send it, versus filtering it like we talked about. So those are some kind of baby steps you can take before you get into, like, truly get in productionized product.
Very helpful, Amrita. We noticed that there were some exceptions in DPDP for research. Does this apply to anybody building with AI, or is there any specific caveats in that?
Yes, there are exceptions for research, if you're
Yeah.
doing something. But if you're getting into model training, I will always caution people about the fact that I said that models will never forget anything. So
Hmm.
there are sometimes the only place it is differs is sometimes models are built only for research purposes, and then there are some productionized models. So there may be some exceptions that the rule may have for research only models, but then you have to be very careful to make sure it is used only for research and only by research folks.
Okay.
Right. And a lot of times with research, you can do it very well with synthetic or anonymized data. And I would encourage people going down that path versus, even for if you're doing, let's say, drug research or drug discovery or things like that, you do need detailed health information of someone, right? But you don't need their name. You can get their age. You don't need their birth date, right? So
True.
there are some
True.
ways to anonymize the data for research as well, and I think that's what we should think about.
No, no. Very practical advice again, Amrita. I think I really hope many startups are listening to this. Is this something that people can then start looking at positioning as an advantage competitively in business in any way, or is it should they just view this only as a compliance and rules for getting a seat at the table?
No, I'm happy you brought this up because I keep telling folks this is your biggest differentiator and competitive advantage.
Okay.
Because if you are prepared with all the guardrails for protecting, you are DPDPA compliant, all that is there, you are going to be able to innovate at a much faster pace than someone who doesn't have that. Because then they are going to spin cycles trying to do it the right way. They won't be able to confidently move ahead in the market at the pace that you're moving with. Second is customer trust. At some, customers are going, if there are two people in the market, one is saying, I'm able to protect your data a certain way, the other is not, then, where people are going to go. Especially for SaaS providers, ISVs, this is huge because you are selling to companies and companies are going to buy your product because they're like, oh, one less thing for me to think about. So I think there is a lot of advantages to be able to get on the whole bandwagon, as I say, much earlier rather than waiting for it much later.
So what you're saying is this can be a competitive advantage because this is going to be definitely something that's going to be a minimum barrier to entry, which many people have to now adopt. I mean, almost all have to adopt.
Yes.
Um, Great. So I think we've come to the end, of a very, very, um, informative and enlightening podcast on DPDP. What's your last piece of advice to AI builders who think they can wait until DPDP is fully implemented?
Don't wait. My biggest
Okay.
advice. I think I would just say innovate, build, don't feel constrained. If you, and these laws are, it seems very daunting when you think of a compliance law. It really
Right.
isn't. It's like I keep telling people, right? The government tells you to like put a seat belt, put a helmet. We all hate doing it. It's not to stop you from going fast. It is to protect you when you're going fast so that you don't get injured in an accident. And that's what this
Brilliant.
is for. You go fast, go really fast. But if you have your seatbelt and helmet on, like your data privacy laws, you'll just continue to keep going faster and you can go ahead of everyone else. So I would just say, don't wait.
No, that's a fantastic analogy. So for those who are listening in, DPDP, is, what Amrita is telling us is don't look at it as a tool that's sort of like a brake or slowing you down, but just another tool that's actually helping you go faster and protect you as you go faster and build and protect not only you, but also the consumers whose trust is embedded in your systems and in your relationship. Amrita, fascinating, chat with you, and really loved having you here and looking forward to having you, on more podcasts with us. And thank you so much for taking time out and sharing.
Always happy to do this.
Hope you enjoyed this episode of the Neural Talks. Hit subscribe or follow us on LinkedIn to stay informed of many more great episodes on AI coming up. We're the Neural, where humans meet AI.